The sun rose slow over the ridge the way old men stand from chairs, careful, aching, remembering every weight they ever carried. Light spilled into the empty main street of Redwood Crossing, brushing the dust into gold as if trying to make something holy out of something forgotten. And in the center of that wide, silent street stood the iron cage. Its bars were still cold from night, but the glow of the morning settled on them like a quiet judgment. Inside sat Elias Crow. He did not move. He did not blink. His shoulders were broad enough to make the bars nervous, yet he stayed still as a winter-buried stone. Folk said he was half wild, half wolf, all danger. Some claimed he'd killed a man and dragged his body up a mountain to feed vultures. Others said he'd lived so long alone in the high pines that he forgot language. Children dared each other to throw rocks at him. Adults stared at him like studying a storm cloud they hoped would stay far away. He looked up as if nothing in this world mattered anymore. But there was something in his eyes, a hollow ache, the kind carried by people who had lost more than anyone ever bothered to ask about. The town whispered around him as if daring him to breathe. And on that same morning, Maeve Harlow arrived in town. Her dress was patched at the elbows. Her boots were thinning at the toes. She tucked her hair neatly under a worn scarf, smoothing it even though no one cared to look at her kindly. Widowhood had aged her more than grief should at her age. People didn't know the softness of her husband or the sickness that stole him in the slow way winter steals firewood. They only knew she lived alone now, quiet at the edge of the river, trying to raise enough money to keep her cabin. She came with a small bundle of things to sell, and one piece she had never imagined giving up, her wedding ring, the last warm thing she owned. Maeve had learned that the sheriff needed extra hands in town, cleaning the churchyard, scrubbing laundry for the jail. She walked past the cage on her way to ask. That was when she first saw him. Elias Crow didn't look up at first. His hair hung in a tangled curtain around his face, and his beard was thick enough to hide the line of his jaw. But something made Maeve stop. Some echo of loneliness. Some shared note between two people the world had chosen to overlook. And then he lifted his gaze. The moment struck her like a wordless confession. His eyes were not wild. They were quiet, shattered, almost gentle, like someone who had walked too far into the world's cold. Her breath trembled. She'd seen that look before, in the mirror, on the nights when grief caved in her chest and she could not speak. Behind her, townsfolk stood whispering. Reckon he'll bite her hand clean off. Widows get soft for anyone who looks at 'em. Man like that belongs chained. She ignored them and approached the bars. From a small canteen at her side, she poured a measure of water into a battered tin cup left near the cage. Then she slid it carefully toward him. Elias didn't move for a long moment. The breeze lifted dust into the sunbeam between them, slow, gold, weightless. Then, with a gentleness that surprised even himself, he took the cup, not with the hunger of a beast, but with the reverence of a man who could not remember the last kindness offered him. The water trembled between his hands. Maeve gave a small nod, and something shifted behind his eyes, a softening, a remembering. Before she could speak, Sheriff Boone Calder strode out of the jailhouse, boots booming like a warning. He was a broad man, with a jaw carved from pride and a voice that carried a permanent sneer. "Best step away from the cage, Maeve," he said. "Mountain man ain't fit for sympathy." "He looks thirsty, Sheriff," she replied softly. "He looks dangerous," Boone snapped. "He'll be sold off within a week. Labor gangs need strong backs. Man like him don't deserve a trial." Maeve felt something cold coil under her ribs. In this town, justice bent around whispers and fear, never truth. Boone stepped closer. "Take my word, nothing human left in that one." But Maeve had learned to hear what people tried to hide behind certainty. She looked at Elias, really looked, and found more humanity in the quiet of his eyes than in the sheriff's entire stance. She walked away before Boone could say more, carrying the weight of the morning inside her. The next day, she returned with a slice of stale bread. She laid it near the bars. Elias hesitated, then took it without lifting his eyes to hers. But as she stepped back, he shifted slightly, placing himself between her and a gust of grit-filled wind rolling through the street. It was a small gesture, instinctive, protective. The kind of gesture a man makes when he still remembers how to care. Rumors swelled in town. Reuben Pike and his friends gossiped loudly at the saloon, letting their taunts carry into the street. Widows lost her senses. She'll take anything home now. Maybe she sees a pet in that wild thing. Their laughter scraped against her like a dull knife, but Maeve kept her chin tucked, pretending she didn't hear. Shame was a familiar companion. She'd learned to swallow it. What she hadn't learned was how to ignore the quiet pull in her chest each time she looked into Elias's eyes. One afternoon, she overheard Reuben boasting drunkenly about how they captured Elias, how they'd stolen furs from his traps, cornered him with rifles, and claimed he threatened them. Sheriff Boone locked him up without even letting the man defend himself. Elias hadn't been violent. He'd simply been alone, surviving the only way he could. Maeve didn't sleep that night. Her cabin felt too small, too fragile. She lit a candle and stared at her wedding ring, the gold catching soft sparks of flame. Her husband had worn a similar softness in his eyes, tired, quiet, always misunderstood by louder men. "What good are memories," she whispered, "if they're the only thing left keeping you from saving someone else?" By dawn, she had made her decision. The sun was high when she walked back into town, noon sharp, the air shimmering, the earth cracking under boots. Townsfolk gathered around the cage as Sheriff Boone rolled out a wagon for the labor gang waiting to buy Elias. Maeve stepped forward. People went silent as if the world itself leaned in. She removed her wedding ring. The metal was warm from her palm, and her hand trembled as though she were letting go of something heavier than gold. She held it up, voice steady though her heart was a storm. "I want to buy the man," she said. Boone laughed aloud. "You don't buy men, Maeve." "Not here." "Not as property," she answered. "As someone who deserves one more chance at life." Murmurs surged like rising wind. Boone narrowed his eyes. Her courage unsettled him. "Even if I was to allow it, you offering that ring? It's all you got left." Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but it cut clear through the heat. "Then let it be worth something." Elias finally stood in the cage, chains clinking faintly. His eyes held hers, startled, confused, then slowly burning with something old and buried. Dignity. Boone took the ring. With a nod that made his jaw twitch, he unlocked the cage. Elias stepped out. The silence in town thickened. Elias towered above most men, but he didn't move with threat, only with a deep, tired caution. He looked at Maeve's bare hand, noticing the missing ring. Then, softly enough that only she heard, he said, "You shouldn't have done that." She met his gaze. Everyone deserves to be unchained once. Those words lodged in the air between them like a vow. But the labor gang leader wasn't about to lose what he thought was his. He reached for Elias's arm. "Ring or no ring, that man's ours." Before Elias could move, Maeve stepped between them. "You'll not touch him," she said, voice fierce, trembling like a branch holding the full weight of a storm. "He is free by law and by what I paid." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The leader scoffed, but something in Elias made him hesitate. A quiet, rising presence, as if the man who once lived with mountains behind him was remembering their strength. He took one slow step forward. The gang stepped back, not because he threatened them, but because a man who has been freed by someone else's sacrifice carries a different kind of fire. Maeve exhaled shakily. Elias stayed beside her, not touching, but close enough she felt the solid warmth of him. Sheriff Boone watched with a face twisted by something between anger and disbelief. Side by side, Maeve and Elias walked down the dusty street while everyone parted silently around them, unsure if they were witnessing madness or a kind of salvation. They reached the edge of town before Maeve dared to look up at him. He was studying the horizon, brow furrowed, as if learning how to breathe free air again. "I don't expect anything from you," she said gently. "Only that you walk beside me until you decide where you want to go." He nodded once, slowly. Gratitude flickered across his features like the faintest dawnlight breaking over stone. They continued toward the river trail, each step quiet, each breath measured, each heartbeat echoing a strange, fragile beginning. And somewhere behind them, the cage sat empty, rusted bars warming under the sun, as if finally relieved of the burden they'd held. If you had stood there, if you'd felt the heat, the hush, the shifting of something unseen, you might have sensed it too. That sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stand for someone no one else will stand for. And sometimes the strongest soul is simply the one who has been believed in again. Because the hardest cages we ever live inside are not built of iron or chains. They are built of judgment. And freedom begins the moment someone gives up something precious, just to remind you that you are still worth saving.